A lot of us kickstart our day with a big, refreshing glass of ice water. It feels so crisp, so clean. It just seems like the perfect way to wake up, right? But what's actually going on inside our bodies when we do that? Today, we're going to dig in and find out if this daily ritual is the ultimate health hack or maybe a habit that's doing more harm than good. So just picture your morning routine. You roll out of bed, you head to the kitchen, you reach for that glass. The question seems simple, but the answer? It's surprisingly complicated. Are you jump-starting your system for peak performance? Or could you be creating a subtle drag on your body's functions without even knowing it? To get to the bottom of it, here's our game plan. We're going to start with the morning water debate, then look at the cold shock advantage. We'll cover when cold water can actually hurt, bust some common myths, and wrap it all up with your own personal prescription. All right, let's start with the big picture. This isn't some new question people are asking. The whole debate over water temperature has deep roots in both ancient traditions and modern clinical research. So what's really fascinating here is this fundamental clash of ideas. On one side, you have ancient practices like Ayurveda and traditional Chinese medicine. They warn against cold water, believing it actually puts out your digestive fire or Agni, which slows down your ability to process food. But then, modern medicine comes in and says, hold on, our bodies are incredibly good at regulating temperature. A cold drink just doesn't stay cold for very long once it hits your stomach. Okay, so keeping that modern view in mind, let's look at the science. Because for a lot of people who are always chasing that extra edge, that cold shock is a legitimate biohack. It's a way to naturally boost your performance. And check this out. This number really illustrates the biggest benefit. That little jolt you feel from cold water, it's not just in your head. Cold exposure can cause your norepinephrine levels to spike by 200, even 300%. And norepinephrine is this powerful neurotransmitter that basically dials up your focus, alertness, and motivation. Now think about how that stacks up against your morning coffee. Caffeine gives you a fantastic spike, no doubt, but it often comes with that dreaded afternoon crash. Well, the alertness you get from a cold stimulus, like ice water, it's different. It's more of a sustained release of your body's own focus chemicals, and you don't get that crash later on. And the benefits don't stop there. Your body actually has to burn a few extra calories just to warm the water up. That's a process called thermogenesis. Some studies have even shown it might make you eat a little less at your next meal. It can also stimulate something called the vagus nerve, which is like this superhighway between your brain and your gut, helping to calm your whole system. And hey, if you're an athlete, it's amazing for lowering your core body temp during a workout. Okay, but, and this is a big but, it's not a magic bullet for everyone. We have to look at the other side of the coin. For some people, that glass of ice water can create some real documented problems. This is where the advice gets a lot more personal. So if you have a rare disorder called achalasia that affects swallowing, cold water can be straight up painful. If you're someone who gets migraines, it can be a trigger. Battling a cold? Well, ice water can actually thicken nasal mucus, making you feel even more congested. And of course, if you have sensitive teeth or certain circulatory issues, you'll definitely want to be cautious. And that migraine risk, it's not just a story people tell. A clinical study found that 7.6% of the women who took part developed a headache almost immediately after drinking ice-cold water. So the key takeaway here is that for some people, this is a very real physiological response. Okay, let's move on to one of my favorite parts, busting some myths. We're going to tackle some of the biggest things you've probably heard about drinking cold water, the stuff that sounds kind of plausible but just doesn't hold up when you look at the science. Here are the two heavy hitters. First, the myth that cold water just grinds your digestion to a halt. As we've seen, your stomach is an incredible furnace. It warms that water up in just a few minutes. Second, the idea that it makes you gain weight. The science actually points the other way. But let's be real, the extra 8 or so calories you burn per glass is not a weight loss strategy. And hey, don't just take my word for it. To really put that digestion myth to rest, here's a quote from Dr. Kaushik Govindraju. He's an internal medicine specialist, and he says it plainly. There's no scientific evidence that cold water has any significant impact on digestion, period. Your body is just too good at warming things up. So, after weighing all the science-backed pros and the cons, where does that leave us? Well, it brings us to the most important part of all, figuring out what works for your body. And look, this right here is probably the most crucial point. Before you even worry about the temperature, you have to worry about hydration. The most important thing you can do when you wake up is to simply drink water. any safe temperature of water to reverse the dehydration that happens overnight. That is the absolute foundation of morning wellness. So how do you make the right choice for you? It really just comes down to these 3 steps. First, prioritize consistency. What temperature will actually encourage you to drink enough water? Second, take an honest look at your health. Are you an athlete who could use the cooling effect, or do you have one of those conditions that cold can aggravate? And finally, the most important rule of all, just listen to your body. It's going to give you the best feedback you can possibly get. Ultimately, this whole debate isn't about whether ice water is good or bad. It's about figuring out what is optimal for you. The science shows there are real benefits and real risks. So the question to ask yourself is this: what temperature is going to help you get and stay hydrated today? So that first glass of ice water in the morning, a lot of us do it, right? But is that refreshing habit a health hack, or is it actually hurting you? Let's find out. First, let's look at the pros. Why that cold shock might actually be a good thing. Okay, the big one, alertness. The claim is it wakes you up, and science actually backs this up. That cold hits your system and can triple your norepinephrine. That's your focused neurotransmitter right there. Okay, so what about metabolism? This is where things get a little controversial and pretty interesting. One study saw a huge 30% metabolism boost, but newer studies say it's actually less than 3%. So what does that really mean? Your body burns like 17 extra calories warming up that water. That's it. But it's not all about metabolism. Ice water can also give your powerful vagus nerve a little jolt. And get this, that cold shock can actually trigger a calming response. It can even slow your heart rate. All right, let's talk about the downsides, because for some folks, ice water is a really bad idea. If you get migraines, have certain health conditions, or even just a cold, it can make things worse. But what's really interesting? That whole fear about it wrecking your digestion, it's mostly a myth for healthy people. So, what's the final verdict here? Well, it seems like the impact of ice water is really a two-sided coin. For most of us, that cold shock is what's called hormesis. Think of it like a mini workout for your body. But at the end of the day, the real goal is just hydration. Hot or cold, just drink water. So, is your morning ice water a tool or a trigger? That's really up to you and your body.